That moment, right? When you're just staring at a problem. Maybe it's that tangle of cables behind the TV or a really tough decision you have to make it work.
Yeah, and you're thinking, okay, how do I actually solve this? We all hit those things, big and small, every day.
Absolutely. And that basic question, how we tackle these challenges, that's exactly what we're diving into today.
Mm-hmm. We've gone through some really fascinating stuff. Articles looking at how we even define a problem, different strategies.
And those YouTube talks, too, unpacking things like mental shortcuts, cognitive biases.
Right, plus some psychology basics, perception, language, creativity, and even digging into textbooks on memory, reasoning, attention. It's quite a mix.
So our mission here for this deep dive is basically to pull out the key insights from all of that, to really get a handle on what problems are and the, well, sometimes surprising ways our minds try to find the answers.
We're aiming for those aha moments, making things click without just drowning you in information.
Exactly. Okay, so where do we start? In cognitive psychology, how do they even begin to categorize different problems?
Well, one of the first big distinctions the sources make is between well-defined and ill-defined problems.
Okay.
Think of well-defined problems as the more straightforward ones. They've got a really clear starting point.
Like setting up a chessboard or the numbers you're given in a math problem.
Precisely. You know exactly where you are at the beginning. The given state is clear.
Right.
And then there's a specific set of rules or actions you can take, your operators.
So in chess, how the pieces move. In math, the operations you're allowed to use.
Exactly. And crucially, the goal state is also crystal clear. You know when you've solved it.
Checkmate. Or finding what x equals.
Right.
Yeah. The sources mention the Towers of Hanoi puzzle too, right? Clear start, moves, end goal.
That's a perfect example. Now, ill-defined problems. They're missing one or more of those clear parts.
Like what?
Well, think about trying to, say, feel happier or maybe become a better public speaker.
Ah, okay. Where do you even start with that?
Right. The potential strategies are kind of endless, often vague, and how do you know for sure when you've solved it? It's much more fuzzy, more subjective.
That makes a lot of sense. So if we practice on those well-defined ones, like doing a daily Sudoku, even a simple one, that 4x4 grid, where the numbers 1 to 4 have to add up to 10 in each box, row, column, and you only use each number once per line.
Yeah.
Does doing that actually help us get better at solving problems in general?
Absolutely. One of our sources really emphasizes how practice with those kinds of puzzles can sharpen your skills.
How so?
Think of it like mental exercise. By regularly working through that Sudoku grid, you're practicing pattern recognition, applying rules logically, thinking strategically.
So it's like building mental muscles.
Mm-hmm.
Working those logic puzzles improves our agility for other kinds of problems, even if they don't look like Sudoku.
That's the core idea, yeah. Those underlying skills, seeing patterns, applying rules, thinking ahead, they can often transfer, even to more ambiguous, ill-defined situations.
Okay, that's cool. So we get the difference between well-defined and ill-defined. But what about when we just get completely stuck,
Oh, yeah.
When you feel like you've tried everything and the answer is just nowhere in sight? That's when people say you need to think outside the box, isn't it?
Exactly. And that phrase often comes down to overcoming something called functional fixedness.
Functional fixedness.
Oh.
What's that?
It's a kind of mental block. We tend to see objects as only having their usual intended purpose, and that can really hinder finding creative solutions.
Okay, can you give an example? How does that work?
The classic one is the candle problem. Psychologists love this one. People get a candle, some matches, and a box of tacks.
Right.
And the task is to fix the candle to a wall so the wax doesn't drip.
Okay. How do most people approach it?
Well, most people struggle at first because they just see the box as, well, a container for the tacks. That's its function.
Right, its job is to hold tacks.
But the solution, the aha moment, comes when you realize the box itself can be used differently. You can tack the box to the wall and use it as a little shelf for the candle.
Okay, I see. Using the box in a new way.
Precisely. And cognitive psychologists study these kinds of puzzles to understand those mental leaps, what helps us break free from that fixed thinking or what keeps us stuck.
So what can you do about it? Is there a technique?
One practical thing is to actively brainstorm other uses for everyday objects. Like just pick something nearby a hammer, say. Before you use it for a nail, try listing 5 completely different things you could do with the head or the handle. It forces you to break that initial functional mold.
That's a great tip. Just consciously trying to see things differently. It's wild how easily our first thought can box us in. So how does this connect to creativity then? Thinking outside the box seems pretty creative.
It absolutely is. Creativity is crucial for so many problems, especially the ill-defined ones, or those needing a totally fresh perspective. And our sources point to a sort of standard definition of creativity. For something to count as creative, it usually needs to be both novel, new, and valuable.
New and useful, essentially.
Exactly. Just being weird isn't enough, right? A random string of letters might be novel, but it's not creative problem solving unless it actually helps achieve something.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and even historically, thinkers like Kant talked about genius producing work that wasn't just original but also exemplary. It sets a standard. It's useful in some way. In psychology, that value often means the solution is effective, appropriate for the problem.
So it's not just about having crazy ideas, but ideas that actually work or fit the situation.
Precisely. And there's also this element of agency, kind of knowing what you are doing, as one source put it. It's not just random.
Okay.
Plus, our imagination is key, obviously. But it works with our knowledge and skills to generate those new approaches. And this isn't just about, artistic genius or scientific breakthroughs. It applies to everyday creative fixes, too.
Yeah. We all have those little moments, finding a clever workaround for some small annoyance.
Totally. Our sources also bring up divergent and convergent thinking.
All right, I've heard those terms.
Divergent thinking is that broad, exploratory style generating lots of possibilities. Great for the start of problem solving.
Brainstorming mode.
Exactly. Convergent thinking is the opposite. It's focused, analytical, good for evaluating those ideas and picking the best one to actually implement.
So you need both, really.
Ideally, yes. You use them at different stages. Open up possibilities first, then narrow down to a solution.
Okay, that makes practical sense. Now,
yeah,
even when we try to be logical, try to find the best answer, our brains seem to take shortcuts sometimes, don't they? They can lead us astray. That's heuristics and biases.
That's exactly it. Heuristics are those mental shortcuts, quick rules of thumb. They save time, save effort, but yeah, they don't always give the best or most rational result.
And biases.
Biases are more like systematic patterns of deviation from logic or rational judgment. Predictable ways our thinking goes off track.
Okay, let's unpack a couple of those. What's a big one that can really mess with our problem solving or decisions?
The framing effect is a really powerful example.
Framing, how something is presented.
Exactly. Our sources describe that classic study about treating a disease. People, even doctors, made different choices depending on whether the outcome was framed positively, like lives saved, or negatively, lives lost.
Even if the actual numbers were identical.
Even if the objective outcome was exactly the same, people tended to be more risk-averse when things were framed in terms of losses. It just shows how much the presentation of a problem can sway our choices.
Wow. That's quite something. How can we guard against that?
Well, one thing is to consciously try to reframe the problem yourself. Look at it from the opposite perspective, or seek out how different people describe the situation. Get multiple frames.
That's good advice. Okay, what's another common bias?
The anchoring heuristic is another really interesting one.
Anchoring, like dropping an anchor.
Sort of, yeah. It's where an initial piece of information, the anchor, heavily influences any later estimates or judgments you make, even if that first piece of info is totally random.
How does that work?
The example used is estimating the height of Mount Everest. If I first ask you, is it taller or shorter than, say, 150 feet, which is obviously way too low?
Right.
Your final estimate of the actual height is likely to be much, much lower than if I'd first asked, is it taller or shorter than 300,000 feet, which is way too high.
Even though both numbers are useless for the real height.
Exactly. We tend to latch onto that first number, the anchor, and then adjust from there, but usually not enough. That initial, maybe arbitrary number just sticks in our head and biases the final guess.
Makes you wonder how often that happens without us noticing. Probably constantly.
It likely does. And then there's overconfidence bias.
Thinking we're better or know more than we actually do.
Precisely. We tend to be overly certain about our own abilities, our knowledge, how accurate our judgments are.
Can you give an example?
Research shows it everywhere. College students thinking they know how their peers will react, for instance. Or, a really important one, the link between how confident an eyewitness sounds and how accurate their memory actually is. The correlation is surprisingly weak. Just because someone is absolutely certain doesn't mean they're right.
That's a critical reminder, isn't it? Especially since we often do trust confidence. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. What about using past experiences? Solving a new problem by thinking about a similar one we solved before. That's analogy, right?
Exactly. Analogical problem solving.
Yeah.
You use a solution from a known problem, the source problem, to help figure out a new related target problem.
Okay.
Our sources bring up that classic pair, the general's army problem and Dunker's radiation problem.
Right, tell us about those.
So the general needs to capture a fortress. He has a big army, but all the roads leading to it are mined, so only small groups of soldiers can pass safely.
Okay, so he can't send the whole army down one road.
Right. The solution is to divide the army into small groups, have them approach the fortress from different roads simultaneously, and converge all at once.
Attack from multiple sides with smaller forces.
Exactly. Now, the radiation problem. You have a patient with a tumor. You need to destroy it with high-intensity radiation, but high intensity will also destroy the healthy tissue it passes through on the way to the tumor.
So how do you zap the tumor without killing the good tissue?
And the analogous solution, inspired by the general, is to use multiple weaker radiation beams. Each one isn't strong enough to harm the healthy tissue much on its own.
But they all converge on the tumor.
Exactly. They meet at the tumor, and their combined intensity is enough to destroy it.
That's clever. So the process is noticing the connection.
Yeah, 3 steps, basically. First, you have to notice the analogy exists between the two problems. That's often the hardest part.
Okay.
Second, you map the corresponding parts. The fortress is like the tumor, the army is like the radiation beams, the roads are like the paths through the body.
Makes sense.
And third, you apply that mapping. You transfer the solution structure divide and converge from the source to the target problem.
But you said noticing is hard.
Yeah, studies found that just telling people the general story didn't automatically make them solve the radiation problem. They often needed a specific hint, like, think about the story you just heard. Our brains don't always make the connection automatically.
Fascinating. We need that little nudge sometimes. Now, all this thinking, logic, puzzles, creative solutions, analogies, it all requires us to pay attention, right? How does attention fit in?
Attention is absolutely fundamental. Selective attention is the big one here.
Meaning?
It's our ability to focus on specific information while filtering out distractions. The classic example is the cocktail party phenomenon.
Right, being able to follow one conversation in a noisy room.
Exactly. But if someone across the room says your name, you often notice it immediately, even though you were filtering out their voice before.
Huh. So we're always kind of monitoring the background?
It seems like it. We're constantly making choices, often unconsciously, about what gets priority. The key for problem solving is being aware that you are selecting. And you might be filtering out something important without realizing it.
So be mindful of what you're focusing on and what you might be ignoring.
Yes. And our attentional capacity is limited. We just can't process everything fully at once, which is why selection is so crucial.
Were there theories about how this filtering works?
Oh, yeah. Early ideas, like Broadbent's filter model, suggested we filter things out very early based on physical features like pitch or loudness, like a bottleneck.
Okay.
But later models, like Treisman's attenuation model, suggested it's more like turning down the volume on unattended information rather than blocking it completely. It's weakened, attenuated, but still processed a bit for meaning, which explains why important things, like your name, can still grab your attention.
That makes more intuitive sense, maybe. What about that inattentional blindness thing? That always gets me.
Ah, yes. That's a striking phenomenon. It's when we fail to notice something unexpected, sometimes something really obvious, because our attention is intensely focused on something else.
The gorilla video.
That's the most famous example. People are counting basketball passes and completely miss seeing someone in a gorilla suit walk through the middle of the scene.
It seems impossible, but it happens.
It does. And it has serious real-world implications, doesn't it? Think about driving while distracted. You might be looking at the road, but if your attention is on your phone,
you might not see the car stopping ahead. Scary. Okay, and memory. Obviously crucial for problem solving, too. How does that work?
Memory is woven into everything. We need to encode the problem information, store relevant knowledge, and retrieve it when needed.
Encoding, storage, retrieval, the basic stages.
Right, and they all interact. How well you encode something affects how well you can retrieve it later. Strategies like chunking can help. Grouping information, like remembering a phone number, not as individual digits, but as chunks the area code, the next 3 digits, the last 4. It effectively expands how much you can hold in your working memory, which is vital for complex problems.
So breaking down big problems helps us hold the pieces in mind.
Exactly. And our existing knowledge, what's already stored in long-term memory, heavily influences how we deal with new problems.
These are the schemas you mentioned.
Yes, schemas. Mental frameworks or blueprints built from experience. When you face a new problem, your brain tries to fit it into an existing schema.
Which can be helpful.
Very helpful. Lets you understand things quickly, make assumptions, but it can also lead you wrong if the new situation doesn't quite fit the old schema. Bartlett's War of the Ghosts study showed this: people retelling an unfamiliar story gradually changed the weird parts to make more sense based on their own culture. Their schemas distorted the memory.
Right. And memory isn't perfect. We forget things, make errors.
Definitely. Forgetting can be due to poor encoding initially, decay over time if memories aren't used, or retrieval failure. The info is there, but you can't access it, like that tip of the tongue feeling.
Interference too, right? Old stuff messing with new stuff.
Yes, interference is a big one. Old learning blocking new, or new learning, making it hard to recall old things. That's why good encoding habits, maybe reviewing information and getting enough sleep for memory consolidation, are all important. They make sure the knowledge you need for problem solving is actually accessible.
So look after your memory. Now, what about reasoning, the actual thinking through part?
Right. Reasoning is fundamental to making decisions and evaluating solutions. We use both formal logic and informal everyday reasoning, and there's deductive versus inductive.
Okay, break those down. Deductive first.
Deductive reasoning is going from general principles or premises to a specific, logically certain conclusion. If the premises are true, the conclusion must be true.
Like the example of packing for Spain. If it's summer in Spain, premise 1, and summer is warm, premise 2, then Spain will be warm, conclusion, so pack shorts.
Exactly. That's using general knowledge to reach a specific conclusion about packing. It often involves things like if-then statements. But judging the validity, whether the conclusion logically follows, isn't always straightforward. People make mistakes.
Okay, so deductive goes general to specific, aiming for certainty. What about inductive?
Inductive reasoning is the opposite direction. You go from specific observations to broader generalizations.
Like seeing lots of black crows.
And concluding that all crows are probably black. You're making a general rule based on specific instances.
But that conclusion isn't guaranteed, right?
Never guaranteed. It's about probability, not certainty. You might find a non-black crow tomorrow, and your conclusion needs revising. So induction gives us probable truths based on evidence, while deduction gives us necessary truths if the premises hold. Both are vital for problem solving.
That's a really clear distinction.
Yeah.
Okay, lastly, the sources touched on executive functions. What role do they play?
Executive functions are like the management system of your brain. They're higher level skills that control and coordinate other cognitive processes.
Like planning.
And focus.
Exactly.
Planning, working memory, attention control, inhibiting impulses, mental flexibility, switching strategies when needed.
Our sources note they're especially crucial when things get tricky or dangerous, situations where just running on autopilot isn't enough.
So when you need to consciously direct your thinking?
Precisely. They're often linked to the prefrontal cortex, the front part of the brain. They let us override automatic responses and engage in deliberate, goal-directed problem solving. Really important for complex challenges.
Wow, okay. That's covered a lot of ground, from defining problems to biases, memory, attention, reasoning. So if we try to wrap this up, what's the big takeaway here?
I think the main thing is just how complex and multifaceted problem solving really is. It's not one single skill. It's this incredible interplay of perception, attention, memory, reasoning, creativity.
And we're using both conscious strategies and being influenced by these unconscious shortcuts and biases.
Exactly. It involves so many different parts of our cognition working together, or sometimes, unfortunately, working against each other.
So understanding these cognitive tools and also the potential pitfalls like biases or functional fixedness can hopefully help all of us, help you approach challenges a bit more effectively.
Yeah, and maybe gain a bit more appreciation for just how intricate our minds really are when we're figuring things out.
Definitely.
And maybe as a final thought for you to mull over, considering all these different ways our minds tackle problems, from the super logical to the really intuitive leaps, what might be the most surprising obstacle to solving problems effectively? Something maybe not obvious, but kind of built into how we think based on everything we've discussed.
Something inherent in our cognitive architecture that gets in the way. That's definitely something to reflect on as you face your next puzzle.